Before a CVE gets announced, the internet starts knocking harder on the vendor that made it. Not always, not predictably, but often enough, early enough, that a careful defender can stage a patch while the rest of the world is still blissfully unaware. GreyNoise just spent 103 days watching 147.8 million sessions hit 276 vendor-specific tags. What they found is a warning bell that rings on median 11 days before disclosure. And disclosure, in case you haven't been paying attention to edge device CVEs lately, is already late. Quick disclosure for the room, and I mean that literally. GreyNoise is a Gula Adventures portfolio company. That is not why this report is interesting. It is interesting because the numbers are tight, the methodology is honest about its limitations, and the answer to the question, can passive internet telemetry predict the next CVE, turns out to be yes, modestly, usefully. Mandiant's M-Trends 2026 says mean time to exploit has dropped to -7 days. Exploitation now routinely precedes the patch. Verizon's DBIR says vulnerability exploitation against network devices went up 8-fold year over year. Google's threat intel group counted 90 zero days in the wild in 2025, with roughly half targeting enterprise edge. The warning window is shrinking everywhere. 11 days on the front end is worth defending. From December 14th, 2025 through March 27th, 2026, GreyNoise watched 104 distinct activity surges hit 18 vendors. Within a 3-week statistical window, 53 of those surges were followed by a CVE disclosure for the same vendor, that is 51%. Chance alone would produce 38. The effect size is moderate. The p-value is 0.0015. It is not noise. Over a wider 6-week window, 68 of the 104 surges paired with a CVE. The median warning, the headline number was 11 days. GreyNoise measures two things: session volume, how hard the existing pool of scanners is hammering a vendor, and unique source IP count, how wide the scanning infrastructure is getting. Both seem like reasonable early warning signals. Only one of them holds up to statistical testing. Session volume is the signal. When existing scanners suddenly start hitting a vendor harder than normal, that intensity spike consistently precedes disclosure. IP breadth on its own does not reach statistical significance at the tight 3-week window. Treat it as corroboration, valuable when it lines up with a session spike, unreliable alone. When both channels fire together, 5 of 7 events paired with a CVE within 6 weeks. That rate is eye-catching. 7 is also a tiny sample. Call it a confidence booster, not a standalone signal. Cisco gave 18 days of warning. 5 distinct surges escalated between February 7th and February 23rd before Cisco disclosed CVE 2026-2001-27, a CVSS 10.0 authentication bypass in Catalyst SD-WAN exploited since 2023 by a threat cluster called UAT8616, according to Five Eyes advisories. CISA mandated 24-hour remediation. That is a fraction of the standard 2-week window. SonicWall ran a textbook countdown. 3 surges against Sonic OS API infrastructure landed 19 days, 10 days, and 3 days before disclosure. Each surge was closer to the advisory than the last. GreyNoise calls this countdown compression. Ivanti's Pulse Secure VPN tag spiked 8 days and 2 days before CVE 2026-1281, an unauthenticated remote code execution bug in Endpoint Manager Mobile. The second surge was the more intense of the pair. It arrived less than 48 hours before the advisory. HP and Dell produced 7 paired surges across 4 CVEs, the most of any vendor in the study. MikroTik contributed 5 surges against 3 CVEs on a baseline that already generates 28.3 million sessions a month. So even moderate percentage increases translate into enormous absolute volumes. TP-Link paired 5 distinct surges to 5 distinct CVEs. There's a different shape, short, scattered, discrete. Both Cisco and SonicWall showed surges that got closer together as disclosure approached. GreyNoise calls this hypothesis countdown compression. It shows up on only 2 of 18 vendors. It has not been formally tested. Treat it as a hypothesis worth watching, not a confirmed finding, which is precisely the kind of disclosure you want to see in a research report. 4 distinct infrastructure patterns show up in the data. A distributed botnet, 26,000 to 116,000 unique IPs per event, 1 or 2 sessions each. Sourced out of Vietnam, Argentina, Mexico, and Algeria. A dedicated operator cluster concentrating traffic through European hosting providers at thousands of sessions per IP. A Cisco-specific campaign that rotated providers mid-operation, dropping from 82% of traffic on one network to 15 while another network ramped to 68. That is the signature of IP-based blocking evasion. And a shared bridge infrastructure that targeted SonicWall and Cisco with nearly identical session counts from the same ASNs. Pre-disclosure scanning does not ride on compromised home routers. It runs on rented infrastructure. This does not exist in a vacuum. Salt Typhoon, The PRC state-sponsored cluster that CISA, NSA, and FBI attributed to China's Ministry of State Security has compromised at least 9 U.S. telecoms and gained access to lawful intercept systems. Their confirmed exploitation of Cisco iOS XE, Ivanti Connect Secure, and Fortinet FortiGate, 3 of the vendor families in this study, tells you what the strategic prize is. The edge is the front door. It is under simultaneous assault from state actors, ransomware operators, and the cybercrime economy. GreyNoise is not claiming to predict 0 days. They are claiming that vendor-specific internet telemetry contains a real, measurable, useful early warning signal for the vendors you already know you depend on. Monitor the vendors whose products sit on your perimeter. Watch for sustained spikes, 2 times baseline for more than 2 days. Watch for IP concentration shifting from distributed sources to a small number of hosting providers. Watch for brute force surges because those arrive closer to disclosure than scanner surges do. And assume that by the time a CVE is published for an edge device, it has already been exploited somewhere. Fair question, what does GreyNoise actually sell? GreyNoise operates a global sensor network that passively observes internet-wide scanning and exploitation. The GreyNoise observation grid is the sensor platform this study is built on. They classify traffic from millions of IPs into benign, malicious, targeted, and noise categories, and publish that context through an API, a visualizer, SIEM and SOAR integrations, and a tag library of known exploitation campaigns. The short version, they turn the background radiation of the internet into something you can actually use. The warning window is shrinking on both sides. On the inside, from exploit to patch, Mandiant says exploitation is arriving 7 days before the patch on average. On the outside, from scanning to disclosure, GreyNoise says 11 days median. Catch that outer signal, and you get most of a standard 2-week sprint cycle to brief leadership, stage the patch, and harden what you can. Miss it, and you are racing a CVSS 10.0 advisory with a 24-hour remediation mandate. 11 days is a gift. It would be a shame not to unwrap it. And that is a wrap on the GreyNoise report. But before we go, I want to thank you for watching with a few cybersecurity jokes. All right, here we go. First one, Chinese botnet edition. Why did the Chinese botnet get a perfect performance review? Because it hit all its targets, stayed under the radar, and never once asked for a raise. Okay, Russian botnet now. Why did the Russian botnet break up with the Chinese botnet? Because it found out the Chinese botnet was also seeing 17 US telecoms at the same time. And finally, my own original botnet joke. How many bots does it take to change a light bulb? None. They just scan the building until they find one that's already on, rent a server in Frankfurt, and send the invoice to a Romanian shell company. Thanks for watching, everyone. Stay patched, stay vigilant, and remember, 11 days is a gift.